Everybody, welcome back to Church Talk. And today I have some very special guests. Once again, my wife joining me. And we have some good friends of ours. Clark and Tony Fitzwater is with us. They are on our worship team, and they're also pastors at our church. You guys are officially called like care pastors, or is it
Yes.
like
Yeah.
associate pastors, or what's like the
Um,
role there?
the care pastor is the official part. I guess I'm an assistant, associate, however that goes, whatever Pastor Mike needs or anybody else needs. But the care role is kind of where we're cultivating our ministry, trying to do hospital visits, home visits when somebody's sick, checking up on people who haven't been there lately, and then also starting new ministries inside the church.
Caring for our congregation, making sure leadership has what they need. Any member, any part of our congregation, and making sure that it's loved and supported.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to be talking about something that it can be a little what's the word I'm looking for? Not really down, but it can be a little
Difficult.
because all of us have come through some hard things in churches.
Right.
And so that's what today is going to be about, is like when you're feeling like you're supposed to be leaving your church, like it just shouldn't be there, or having hard times, whatever. We're going to kind of dive into that. Like, how do you know when it's time to leave, and how do you know when you're supposed to stick it out? Because I think a lot of people have been through that, or maybe you're going through that now. Is like, I don't know if I should stay or go. And so we've all been through that, and fortunately now, I mean, we're blessed that the Lord has us in a great place, and we love where
Yeah.
we are. So this video is nothing about us, like
That's right.
anybody's not wanting to leave or nothing like that, but we've all been through it.
Right. Right.
And so I want us to talk a little bit about that. So the question is, when should you leave your church? So what are some obvious things? Is like, yeah, you need to leave. Like, just some obvious answers of yes. Like, my first thought is like, you have a drag queen show up at your church.
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah, get out of there. But what are some other obvious things that's like, yeah, it's either time to leave, or that's good reason to leave.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that is, that's not a good reason to leave.
So an obvious good reason is the word. If it's not coming out of the Bible, we believe that the full gospel of Jesus Christ is what should be taught, from healing the sick, miracles, raising the dead, casting out demons, all of that. Plus, in addition to the love and encouragement he gave to those that were around him. So I think those are important. So if you're not feeling that, and sometimes the love and encouragement might not necessarily be a reason to leave, but it's a reason to ask. But if you're not being fed spiritually, is a good reason to leave.
I think it's hard when there's just an obvious conflict
Yeah.
between you and leadership. It might just be a personal thing, but doctrine feeds in there immensely. But sometimes you just don't connect like you just truly should. I mean, like, relationships are just, man, it's just the ground of Christianity, and having that connection. And if you don't have that, it's probably not a good place for you. Not that it couldn't be, but
Yeah, because my mind with that goes to, like, Paul. Is it Paul and was it Barnabas?
oh
who
yeah,
They just could not agree, and they had
Yep.
to go separate
Right.
ways.
Yeah.
Right.
And neither one was right or wrong. It was just they just didn't agree,
Right.
and they had to go separate. And that's fine, but there's a right way and a wrong way
Right.
to go about that, and we're going to get to that in a moment as well. But what are some reasons not to leave? Like, you're talking about relationships, and when things get rocky or whatever. sometimes that's like the first thing that people think about is, well, I'm leaving,
Right.
taking my money with me
Yeah.
or whatever. You know,
Yep.
what should we do first
Well-
before just jumping to leaving? And
So this just fell on me. If you're telling yourself to leave, it's probably not time for you to leave. But things like communion, if you think communion should happen every Sunday and it happens every quarter or once a year, that's not a reason to leave, in my belief. I mean, communion is important, but there's so many other things that are, I don't want to say more important, but it's high up in the building block. The foundation. It's not part of the foundation, I don't believe. I mean, that Jesus only did communion once. And baptism. The thief on the cross never had communion. He never was baptized. But Jesus told him, "Surely you'll be in paradise with me later today." So, and that was paraphrased. That was out of my version. Those are a couple things. Music is another reason. You may not agree. Funny, building off what we had in our focus group Wednesday night, somebody may request a song, and there's a reason that your worship pastor is the worship pastor. He is the one, through discernment and knowledge, knows whether or not to sing that song. And it may be the season. We're not going to sing Joy to the Lord this month. It's not the season. The same as there's some songs that, like you like to say, and not that you like to say it, but it is the truth, they minister to you. But on Sunday morning, we're ministering to God.
Right.
So there's a difference there. And so music is a reason that people will leave when they really shouldn't. And I say that in music is important, very important, but it's the part of music that they're offended by because you didn't sing the song I wanted, or you didn't let me sing. We all have gifts, we all have abilities, and you have to rely on the leadership of the church to help lead you to be used when it's time for you to be used.
I would also add that in relationships, maybe you don't click with someone and then you take your toys and go home kind of attitude. I think it takes full maturity if you have conflict to have a discussion about whatever topic was offensive or whatever conversation was offensive, and then drawing on that maturity to move through that. But I mean, prayer is just my go-to. I sure as heck don't know what to do.
Yep.
But I know exactly who does.
mm-hmm.
And it's really difficult sometimes when you're in a place and you're like, no, I'm going to make this work. I've got years here. They're not going to push me out. I'm sticking. And then there just becomes a time where it's just obvious.
And that's kind of like with us years ago. It was like, relationships started to crumble. And I think the Lord allowed that to happen because we would have never left.
Right.
We would have stayed there through everything. And it would have been, well, honestly, we wouldn't have left. But it would have been very hard for us to leave there because that was your church. You grew up there and we got married there. And that was our home, And so when the Lord began to deal with us about and speak to us about leaving, because the relationships had gotten rocky, it's like I think the Lord allowed that to happen so we would say yes to it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we may have said we may not have listened.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes hardships, going through hard things makes you go to the Lord in prayer and begin to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Whereas when everything is going great, it's like sometimes we don't listen very well.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
And it's kind of the opposite was for us. So the real long version shortened is, God told me that he wanted me to preach. And I thought of course I heard what I wanted to hear, which was to be a preacher, which is not what I wanted to do. But I've come to realize that God just wants me to, when he gives me a word, to give that word. But in the meantime, the church I was in, that pastor was giving me the opportunity to preach. And then we weren't offended, but somebody else was offended in our church. But the person that was offended left, and it hurt us because of the way he was offended. And so we were like, I think it's time to go. And because we had already started coming to the bridge on Wednesdays. And so we're mulling it back and forth. And my pastor texted me, and he's like, hey, I want you to preach on forgiveness. And I'm like, ooh, I got to think about that. And so then he says, so then in the next text, after I say, hey, I need to pray about that, he says, but not just any forgiveness. I want you to preach on forgiving your brother and sister in Christ. And I'm like, dude, we got to talk. So I told him, I was like, hey, I texted him, we need to talk. And so we were busy, and it was at the end. This was 2021. No, first part of 22. It was January of 22, February 22. And so we were busy, and Zoom just worked for us. It wasn't, but it was, Zoom got popular because of COVID. But anyway, so we Zoomed, and I said, hey, I knew all this happened. Did you know I knew? And he said, I had no idea you knew about that whole situation. I said, well, then obviously God's telling you that I need to get over it. So, yes, I will preach on forgiveness. And the funny thing was, it was either February 14th or 13th, 14th, 15th, I had to preach on forgiveness around Valentine's Day. So it was a really tough message, but I felt I grew so much in that. And so we moved past that. But our relationships were being built at the bridge. The ones at our other church were not crumbling, but we could tell it was time to go. The season was changing, and the relationships at the bridge were building, and it was just, it got, I hope I'm not getting ahead of it ourselves here, but she said one day we came in from a Sunday service where we were going to our other church, and I said, or she said, I think she said it first, she said, I feel like we were a visitor today. And at the bridge, we felt home. Mm-hmm. And so there's that.
And through that, ups and downs and trying to figure things out, Clark would say, I think God's telling us we need to move and stay full-time at the bridge. And I'm like, no, I'm not getting that. And then a couple weeks later, I'm like, yeah, God's been dealing with me. I think it's time to go. And he's like, well, now I don't know if it is. And so it was, I don't know, probably 2 months at least before we kind of got on the same, all right, yeah, we're feeling it now.
Yeah, after that, because it was, like I said, that came to a head in February. And then we actually, I preached again at that other church in October, and we decided we would do 4 Sundays at the bridge, because all we had ever done was Wednesdays. So we're like, maybe we don't like the Sunday service. Mm-hmm. And so we did, and that's when we came in that 3rd or 4th one, and she's like, man, it feels like it was when we went back to our other church. She's like, I felt like a visitor today. And so that's when we knew. Yeah. And then we'll go ahead and jump ahead. How not to leave is we went to the pastor first, and we're like, hey, we're feeling called to go somewhere else. And he was like, okay. He didn't try to talk us out of it.
You're saying that's how not to leave?
No, that's not how not to. So how to leave, I guess. Okay. I did phrase that wrong. But yeah, one of the ways to leave, and you hear this in corporate world a lot, when you are mad and you're going to leave your job, they want to do an exit interview, because some companies truly want to know what they did wrong. And so even if you, and we were leaving, there was nothing he could say, because God had told us to leave. Right. So there was nothing he could say to keep us. But still yet, is there anything that they could have done different, maybe to cultivate that relationship, and maybe we would have stayed. But in that instance, it wouldn't. But if it is one of those things we were talking about earlier, like communion or the music, those, when you go to leave, if you're leaving over those things and you don't tell the pastor why, then he doesn't understand that there's a problem, and you may not be the only one experiencing that.
And sometimes
so-
you leave for those reasons. It's really selfishness.
Yes, very
Because
selfish.
it's what you want rather than, being faithful to that house of God
Yep.
and just worshiping the Lord and building relationships. And like you said, as long as the word's being preached and, nothing is not biblical. I mean, sometimes if you're searching for a church, you're going to find the style that kind of fits you. But sometimes it's just like, I just want things differently. I want, and if we really look at that, it's all about me.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned too about being led of the Lord, and that was us. Was you knew way before I did that the Lord was leading us away. He had begun to speak to you first, and you would tell me like, I feel like we're gonna be going a different direction, and I think that was kind of critical in that, because that was your church before it was mine. And even in other churches, when we would be somewhere, it's almost like the Lord speak to you first. And I don't think, maybe it's because women are emotionally attached, and men can just, we're not really, generally speaking, we're not emotionally attached to things as much as women. So maybe that's why the Lord spoke to you first. I don't know. But, but yeah, he like just put it in your spirit, like you're going to be going a different direction. And it wasn't very long. Like, I agree.
Yeah, I remember, because we had such a strong relationship with, the people there. Because I'd grown up there. I had gotten saved there. I'd been, baptized in the Holy Spirit. And, I was so young when we got there. And, and I remember thinking for such a long time, being crushed to think, have to leave.
Yeah.
I was like, we shouldn't have to leave. We were here first.
Yeah.
Why should we have to leave?
And in the flesh, you get angry
Yeah.
at your pastor or your leadership team or whatever, because you're like, they get to stay and we gotta go. But it's not like that. It's like you've come to the end of this assignment, and I want to move you to a different assignment.
Yeah.
And even like, because I went and talked to our pastor. I'm like, I feel like the Lord's leading us to go, to leave. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, we don't know.
Yeah.
And like, the Lord's dropped in our spirit the scripture about
It's about Abraham.
Abraham leaving to a place where the Lord's going to show him.
Yeah.
And like, so the Lord's going to show us where to go. And he told me, he said, well, you can't launch without a launching pad. You got to launch from somewhere. And when you launch, you got to make sure that you land somewhere. And even in us exiting, he was my pastor.
Yeah.
But I think he was hurt too, because we were going. So it was a two-sided thing, because he didn't want us to leave and we didn't want to leave. And there was like, and even today when we see them, there's an awkwardness, even though there shouldn't be, because nothing is like wrong. We're not angry at them, and I don't think they're angry at us, but it's just, it's awkward now. And I don't know why that is, but it is. Maybe because we were so close.
I think, because there was it was like a father-mother child relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, it got broken severely. And
And it wasn't
It-
like there was any fights or anything
No,
like
there
that
wasn't.
going on. There
It
wasn't
wasn't,
anything
but it was
crazy like that, but
It, you know,
it crumbled.
it did.
Yeah.
And I remember just, you know, it broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it broke my heart.
Looking back at things, now we realize leadership are people too. And they,
Yes.
and,
Oh
Right.
yeah.
and
Yeah.
all these,
Yeah.
the flesh comes in and
Mhm.
we get aggravated with each other, and it's
Yeah.
a two-way street. And sometimes we, like you said, the way that we're treated by our leadership, even
Mhm.
like they have a bad day,
Yeah.
or maybe it's just like in our situation, the relationship, and just kind of the
Mhm.
Lord allowing it to crumble, and then we take that, and then like you said, we think that that's like how the Lord looks at us,
Right.
rather than how somebody who's dealing with the same thing we're
Right.
dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
And I just wasn't mature. I didn't, you know,
and through that, the Lord
In that,
matured you.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
yeah.
he showed me, you know, it took years later, you know, but, you know, now I'm free from that. And,
Mhm.
you know, but I love how the story has changed,
Mhm.
obviously.
Yeah.
How the Lord took us out of that after, you know, he changed my heart saying, you need to surrender to me. It's not about this
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's about you.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
about you surrendering to me and
And-
what I want to do in you. And then
Mhm.
after I surrendered to him,
Yeah.
then it all changed. Then
That was probably the Sunday morning that the Lord broke it in my spirit.
Yeah.
Is like, you're released.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, you felt like a visitor.
Yeah.
That next Wednesday after that Sunday morning, I walked in and felt like a visitor in my church.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting because you all left a church that you grew up in, and we left the church that Clark grew up in. And Clark was the one that suggested, because it was through COVID, and
Our church had stopped
They-
doing a Wednesday evening
yeah, there was
deal.
not
Mhm.
much of a chance to be spiritually fed. And so Clark suggested, hey, why don't we go to the bridge? It's like,
Yeah,
well,
because
okay.
Pastor Tim that used to
Yeah.
be there, Tony used to work with him years ago, and I was like, hey, let's go over and
Just
check
a
it out.
few.
And yeah. And one thing you said back when you were talking about, pastors are people too, 24, 25 years ago, my father-in-law said, where do you think the devil works the hardest? In the church or in the beer joint? And if he can get a pastor, if he can just whisper in that pastor's ear,
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
how much trouble can he create in a church?
Right.
And so and that's one of the things that we've realized as care pastors. It's not just caring for the congregation, but it's caring for our pastors.
Yeah.
Does Pastor Mike need anything? Does Pastor Missy need anything? Does the young adults or do the little kids, do they need anything? Do you guys need anything? And that's part of what we're there for.
Yeah.
Because because the flesh is it can be a big stumbling
Yeah.
block.
Mhm.
And for us, the way when we left that ministry, because we were in leadership. So I think when you leave a church from a position of being in leadership or from a position of just like a member, I think it can be a little bit different.
Mhm.
And for us, we went to the pastor, like you were saying, and like, hey, this is what we're feeling, and we want to exit on how you want us to exit.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
How do you want to handle this as the
Yeah.
pastor? And so we stayed a few weeks, and so he set the date, and he and we just kind of submitted to what he wanted to do, and
Yeah.
I think that that's the way that we should.
Mm-hmm.
When there's, I mean, if you're like switching churches because the Lord's called you over here and you got somewhere to go, and that's a little bit different because it's like you're going from one to the other. But like even in your all situation and ours, it's almost like, yeah, you were going to the bridge, but you really didn't know yet. You were just kind
Yeah.
of feeling drawn,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't really have a place to go, even though we kind of did. We kind of knew where the Lord was calling us to, and then when we got there, the very first Wednesday, because we were going to skip, we were going to just not go on Wednesday and be like, let's just take a little bit of time off, and
Yeah.
like I was felt the Lord say no.
I
And
didn't
you
want to go
don't-
anywhere. I'm like, listen,
Yeah.
I just was not interested
Yeah.
Yeah.
in church people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not want anything to do with them.
And our first Wednesday, it's like we met the children's pastor, and he like knelt down to Judah, because Judah was real little at the time, and it was just like we felt home when we walked in that
Yeah.
place, and that was a place for us for a season,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we were there as just attendees, and then we ended up being in leadership at one of the campuses, and you know, things happened there and so forth, but you know, we knew that's where we're supposed to be at that
Yeah.
point.
Mm-hmm.
And then skip ahead a little bit in the future, and stuff happens there too, because like everywhere you go, stuff happens.
Oh,
Right,
stuff
right.
is
You know,
gonna happen.
And how do you? What do you do? Do you? So let's go to the. We kind of talked about how we should leave. How should we not leave?
Oh gosh.
If it's like you feel you're just an, I don't want to say just an attendee, but you're not in leadership.
Yeah.
You're attending the church, and you feel like either something's not right. You feel like there's something not right in the church. You don't know what it is, but you feel like the Lord wants you to leave, or you're just feeling led to go. What should just a member in the church do? Should they just like start to visit
They
some
sh-
other churches, or should they go
They
to the
should
pastor
not
too?
put it on
or-
Facebook or any other social
Yeah.
media that they're upset about
Yeah.
XYZ
I
church
agree.
did.
Yeah.
XYZ.
for sure.
And I'm kind of stealing this. I'm going to kind of steal this, and it's a kind of even my own conglomeration. But if you're the type of person that has never went back to McDonald's because they messed up your order, then come and talk to me about leaving church.
Mhm.
Because you've went back there when they've messed up your order. You went back to the mall. There was a preacher. He said, "How come people can't deal with church hurt, but you can deal with mall hurt?
Yep.
You can deal with fast food hurt, ball game hurt. You ever been mad at an umpire? Your kid got the wrong call.
Yep.
We
Yep.
did karate for
That's
a
good.
long time, and man, I know I hit the guy first, but the other guy got the point. I didn't quit karate because of that.
Yep.
So, you know, and this is coming from being a care pastor. If you feel you're being called, tell me, because I don't want to, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, realize that, she's not here, he's not here, and call and be like, hey, I haven't seen you in a couple weeks. Well, I switched churches because the Lord led me. Well, great, but tell me,
Yeah.
you know, let me know.
Because it's a relationship.
Yeah. I mean,
I
we're
mean, it's-
brothers and sisters, you know? And so, and I get it. There are times that either a church is struggling and you're going there to build them up, or who knows what God has you moving for. But there are good reasons, and people are called. Because when we left, we were not hurt. We had moved past that. And there is, I mean, the day, so I was the leader of the men's group still when we left. And that was one reason it kind of held us, because it was over the holidays and our men's group wasn't meeting. And I said, hey, this will be our last Sunday here. I'm stepping down as the leader of the men's group, and we're changing churches. And one of the ladies said, well, I just have one question. Are you happy where you're going? Or she said, are you happy with your decision? And we were like, yes. And she was like, well, then that's great. Because people see that there's growth and there's a need for you someplace else. So if you are being called away, let somebody know why you're leaving. Because, you know, if God's calling you to leave, I'm not going to ask you to stay. I want you to be obedient to the Lord.
Yeah.
And if a 2 weeks notice is good for the secular world, why isn't it good enough
Yeah.
for his
Well,
kingdom?
I'm not gonna go there because
Christianity, but
I'm not gonna go there, because God can call you to do something today for tomorrow. But I do believe that you can let them know, because other people are going to have questions. They're going to be like, well, where's Tom?
Yeah.
Well, Tom was called away, and so that's
Called away, not caught away, right?
Yeah.
He was called,
But
and
I think another important way not to leave is if you're upset, and then I go to my friends and I'm like, let me tell you what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
This is what happened. Let me tell you. Did you know that
Yeah.
XYZ? I mean, that
Yeah.
whole like festering,
Yeah.
like it reminds me of like poison ivy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like growing
gosh.
and moving and
Mhm.
like just takes over and
Yeah.
consumes and changes things, and
Mhm.
it's almost on purpose hurt.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I want to, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here for a lot of reasons, but twice since we've been pastors at the Bridge, people have come to Tony and I to say, we need to talk to you. And three times. And one was hey, we see this situation. You need to be on the lookout for it. Okay, great. That was great. The another reason was, hey, I was hurt, and
I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do. I have talked to them, but I didn't get any. Well, the reason you didn't get any resolution from the guy that you thought hurt you is because he didn't see any. There was no issue with him, so he didn't know. He was confused by the whole thing. So, but it was great because he came to us and he said, "Hey, this is what happened."
Yeah.
And I assured him, I'm like, hey, that is, I'm going to talk to these people, but I guarantee you that's not what happened. And it wasn't. It was not what happened at all.
But it provided
And-
opportunity to shore up and build more firm a foundation of
Yeah.
a relationship
Yep.
in just those
Yeah.
small circles.
'Cause
And-
communication is huge.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh!
I
yes.
mean,
Yes.
yeah,
I think that's probably like the number one reason why,
Mhm.
people argue and
Mm-hmm.
things happen because they don't communicate
Yep.
and they text. And
Yes.
then whatever
Yes.
mood you're in,
Yes.
you read the
You hear it
text
in that tone.
with the tone that you
Yep.
put to
Yes.
it rather than the tone the person is saying
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So if you are in an argument with someone and you are texting it, stop it. Call
Yes.
them or
Yeah.
go face to
Yeah.
face to them.
Yeah.
Don't
Yes.
use emails and
Absolutely.
texting and things like that
and
because
emojis and
it's-
capital letters
yeah.
and periods.
it's
and,
all read
Punctuation.
wrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
And sometimes you get someone who uses all capital letters because they can't see
right,
the
right,
lowercase letters,
Yes.
and then the receiver says they're
Yes.
yelling at me.
Yes.
right.
And there we
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
with some
Yeah.
big issue
Yeah.
when if we communicated properly,
Yeah.
none of that would
And-
have ever happened.
And
Yeah.
right now, our church is going through a season of growth. We're having these focus groups, and we're talking about things that we can do that the body would like. And so another reason not to leave is because you give a suggestion and it doesn't happen. I want to know if you're leaving on good reasons or bad. Either
Yeah.
way, because
Yeah.
I can hopefully fix the bad, and maybe I can repair it so that the next time it happens, you don't
Yeah,
get so
that kind
you
of
don't get
leads
hurt.
into the next part of the discussion is if you're going through something in your church and you're like, I'm not leaving. I know the Lord's not calling me to leave, but there's some stuff going on. How do I deal with the stuff? How do you continue to support your pastor and your church and your ministry leaders when you do feel hurt and you know the Lord's not leading you anywhere?
Yeah.
So you're supposed to remain there. You're like, okay, Lord, I'm going to remain. How do I still support even though that I'm feeling left out or I'm feeling hurt or I'm feeling whatever the rockiness is there?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when, I got nervous because I didn't want to. When Moses led him out of Egypt, there were those that said, "Let's go back. Being a slave was easier. Being a slave was easier than doing this."
Yeah.
And so there's going to be times when growth is hard. This takes me back to I talked to a basketball player one time, and he was better than 6'6". And I said, "Oh man, what was it like?" And he said it was terrible. He said, "My growing pains hit like he grew a bunch in one summer." He said, "My mom took me to the emergency room because I didn't know what the pain was." But now it's not like he had a choice, but he was playing basketball, Division I basketball, with a chance to go pro. So he endured those pains, and he came out on the other side as a better person for it. And so that's the same with, when there's something going on in the church. And again, if it's something that you don't agree with, go to the pastor and talk to him, because it's something that might be able to be worked out. I just,
I go back to relationships.
Yep.
Find somebody that you can talk to, bounce it off them. This is what I experienced. Am I blowing this up? Is this something that I should worry about?
Yeah.
It just goes back to relationships. Finding a trusting ear, a spouse. If your kids are old enough, mature enough, maybe share it with them. I mean, just having another perspective can shed so much light
Yeah.
on things.
And you also, too, like you said a little bit ago, we were talking, and I don't even remember what it was about now, but you were like, this isn't gossip, but here's information.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's so easy to as you're talking about things, to go right into the gossip mode
Yeah.
because that's flesh, and a lot of times with leadership, I hate to say you're talking about people, but sometimes you're talking about people in a good way,
Right.
in an informative way. That's not like, did you see what such and such, whatever. But like you said, someone may come to you and say, hey, we need to watch for this situation.
Yep.
That's not gossip.
Right.
That's
Right.
as far as, pastors especially being on a leadership team, we are entrusted with the flock.
You're protecting the sheep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's information that we may have and need to share with each other, and it should not go anywhere else.
Right.
And so just like you were saying, as we're just bouncing that information off of one another, we need to find somebody that we can trust,
Yes.
not somebody that may feel the same way that we're feeling, because then that attracts each other.
Yes.
And something can get blown up a lot bigger than what
yes.
it really is.
Yep.
But when you get someone you can trust, and someone that then all of a sudden, any vain imaginings that we have, they can see it.
Yeah.
They can be like, that's
No.
not
Yeah.
that's
That's
not the
not
way
it.
it is.
Slow your roll
You're-
there,
yeah.
Tootsie.
And so you were talking about relationships, and one of the things that we did at our previous church, and one of the things that we're hearing a lot of people are wanting to start is small groups. And so there's a place, if your church has small groups, if there's a Sunday school, a Bible study, get plugged into that, because
yeah.
it gives you that chance to just to have somebody close that understands you and that you feel comfortable talking to.
Yeah. A godly friend.
Yeah. And I don't know the size of your congregations, but if you're in a 100, 400, 600, if you're in a 600 member congregation, you may not even sit next to the same person every week. And so if you can get plugged into that small group, then inside that small group, and this is kind of what was happening earlier, that it wasn't gossip. It was, they didn't know the person, and we were trying to help them understand who they were. And so we're trying to, so then you get in that small group, and they're like, oh, by the way, my neighbor who doesn't come to this small group is in that small group over there. So then you get connected through other people. We got the chance to lead a small group. It was actually a year and a half ago when we were at the bridge, and that small group, we still have a lot of good friends.
Oh, gosh,
I mean,
yes.
that took our connection level from a 2, maybe a 3 to a 7. That there are people there that every time that we see each other, it's a hug, it's a hey, how you doing, it's an I love you. And so if you have small groups, if you have Bible studies, get involved. And if you don't, be that person to go to the pastor and be like, hey, I want to start one. And start those things where you can get connected, where you can have that close knit, even if it's 5 people or 20. That's a great place to be.
Yeah.
I think what's important too is pushing through awkwardness
Yeah.
Oh my, yeah.
to talk to people.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you sense that something is off. Like, like you really need to talk to somebody about something. Push through the awkwardness because it needs to be said. It needs to
Right.
be talked about.
Mhm.
You need to communicate. Because like you said, communication is the number one thing
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that most times that's what will start the thing off. And that's
Mhm.
where the ball is dropped
Yeah.
and where, everything begins right there,
Mm.
where it's just a simple miscommunication and where division begins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've seen you two do that
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah.
It's been like you would come home and say, I think I may have said something wrong today, and like I may have hurt Tony's feelings, or I may have said something that
And it's always been something. Well, the first time I know for sure, I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
But if it sits in you long enough to
Yeah.
start creating that
Yeah.
that tension and that unease, and then there's an opportunity to step away, and then something else might happen, a miscommunication, and then you're like, well,
Mhm.
so then it's another step away.
Yeah.
And so, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that is beautifully said.
Yeah.
To push through the awkwardness.
And the Holy Spirit is telling you, you need to say something,
Mhm.
because if you don't, there's going to be a problem.
Right.
And it's not a somebody else problem, it's a you problem.
Right.
And and a lot of times in churches, what ends up happening is we blame everybody else
Mm.
for the
Mhm.
problem.
Oh yeah.
And it's not everybody else, it's us, and it's like me.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to take ownership of the atmosphere,
Yeah.
Right.
and of the relationships
Yeah.
in the church, and say, I want my church family to be healthy, and that begins with
Right.
me.
Right.
Right.
So if I'm not communicating,
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
I'm not treating everybody right,
Right.
the way I want to be treated,
Mm-hmm.
then that's
Yeah.
going to cause a breakdown
Right.
in the house of God.
And that leads
So-
right back into like the next talking point that we had is, how do you repair a relationship when it's been damaged?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the number one thing is go back to the Bible and do exactly what the Bible says,
Right.
and says go to that person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because as you found out, when you applied that principle,
Mhm.
it's like there's nothing wrong. It was
Yeah.
either, it was all my thinking,
Mm-hmm.
or there may be times it's like, yeah, but then when the communication starts,
Right.
and it's like, oh, well, forgive me for that. Okay, I forgive you. Forgive me for, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it's like it's all wiped out
Right.
Mhm.
because you communicated.
Yeah.
You guys forgiven one another of whatever and I'm not saying you guys, but I mean,
Right.
people
Right.
forgive one another. And I think that's like the main thing
Mhm.
is forgiving each other. Like goes back to
Yeah.
what you were going to be preaching about at your last church is, forgiveness,
Yeah.
forgiving one another.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yep.
If we don't forgive, then the Bible says the Lord's not going to forgive
Yep.
us. And
Yeah.
I remember when, and this is so funny now that I think about it, but I don't know what the timeline is, but just before we started at the bridge, I can't remember the dates of it or whatever, but I remember the Lord had really just put it on my spirit to just begin to preach the gospel, So I told Pastor Mike, and we weren't going there yet. And he's like, well, come preach for me on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And what the Lord had me talk about was forgiveness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
now that I think about the timeline, that's probably right around the time you guys were relatively new
Yes.
Yeah.
to the bridge.
Yes.
And it's like it's just forgiveness is important.
Oh, it is.
Oh, man.
So important.
I mean, I knew it was important before, but I didn't know. It didn't set on me until I read it, and basically he says, "If you don't forgive them,
Yeah.
I won't forgive you."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because our situation, and I'm going to make up names. Tom was mad at Cindy. Cindy was my friend, so I got offended for that because of it. And so I wasn't even in it.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I forgave that person because, one, I shouldn't even have been in the situation. I'm not going to say I shouldn't have been in it because I was kind of in the leadership at the church. The structure was a little different, but that situation just wasn't handled well. But once I read that, I'm like, okay, God,
Yep.
you deal with it then,
Yep.
because it was one of those things where people did leave because of it.
Mhm.
And for right or wrong, they did leave. And but yeah, I'm like, you know what? I shouldn't have cared that much. I should have just prayed about it. And so I think that's another thing is how to repair a relationship is just in prayer, in the
And
Word.
Part of your message that on that Wednesday, you had said, my goal is to step behind the cross
Oh,
and
right,
use
yep.
that as
Mhm.
my lens to see people, and that when people look at me, they see Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
I remember
mean,
that.
that is
Oh.
so ingrained in my brain, and I call that up often because it was just a good word. But that just spoke to me. But like when Clark shares a word, I'm like Uber turned in and or tuned in, and I'm like paying attention, and I'm like, oh, he misspoke. That he wasn't supposed to say that there. Oh, he said the wrong name. Oh, he said the wrong name. Why did he say that? And so, but I think it's easy to be that armchair quarterback to sit in the
Mhm.
pew or in the chair. And, they messed up. They didn't.
Yeah.
They quoted that verse wrong.
Yeah.
But to have that grace with everyone,
Yeah.
including your husband.
Yeah.
But
I think it's especially your husband, isn't it?
Oh, possibly. But it's to just forgiveness is just needs to just pour out of you.
Yeah.
And two, like when you walk up to somebody and you're approaching them, no matter like whatever has happened or, big, small, whatever, you walk up to them and you talk to them and you say, I'm sorry for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Not, you don't
Mhm.
say, like, well, like if you
Yeah.
did something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's just something that the Holy Spirit has taught me.
Yeah.
You take responsibility for whatever
Mm-hmm.
because he's showing that to you.
Right.
That you just own it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because, you don't let the other person own
Right.
whatever God's showing you.
Right.
Yeah.
You take it
That's
off
good.
their
Right.
plate.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Just like Jesus took everything off our
Right.
plate.
Yeah.
You take it off theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what he has shown me.
Mm-hmm.
That's
know?
good because
Yeah.
when you put it
Yeah.
on them,
Yeah.
then at
It's-
that moment they're receiving an offense.
Mm-hmm.
Still. You're
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
dumping something
Yeah.
on them.
Yeah.
saying,
Because
okay,
then
now-
then they feel like they've
right.
Right. I created
off.
it.
Yeah, like,
Well-
okay, you still owe me something, or aren't you going to say something to me because I'm giving you this?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm waiting for your portion.
Right.
But
Yeah.
if it's really true, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
sorry because, they don't owe you anything
Mm-hmm.
because you are,
Mhm.
And that's just what the Lord shows me, because you want to restore
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
was lost.
Yeah.
Right.
because that person is more precious
Mm.
than
Yeah.
your ego,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
than your,
Right.
being right,
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
your division and your, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want wholeness.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's just because it grieves
Mm-hmm.
your spirit
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
to have any ugh,
Yeah.
and people are going and two people are going through seasons in their lives
Mm.
where the enemy is really giving them vain imaginings,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
like young mothers, people, older people, and just all kinds of different things, and they get upset over things
Mhm.
easier, and and all kinds of stuff, so you never know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so people get upset easier at different times in their lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be harder for them to walk up and be like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And and I think at least that's what come to me sitting here, that it sometimes it might not be as
Well,
easy for
Nobody
some
likes
people to-
conflict.
yeah,
I
because
mean,
it's
that's
not
not something that
Yeah.
you're going to step into eagerly.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Right.
now we're ready.
yeah.
But
Like,
the
great.
Lord just gave me the word harmony,
Yeah.
and I mean that just
Yeah.
we want that flow. We want everybody
Yeah.
to be moving in the same direction, and there not to be
Mhm.
any discourse or turmoil.
Yeah.
And it can be it can be humbling when you're in a situation
Yeah.
and you're like, well, I messed that up. I gotta
Yeah.
Yeah.
figure out what to do now.
And at the same time, if somebody comes to you and apologizes, receive it.
Mm-hmm.
You may not have felt the offense,
Mm-hmm.
but they obviously felt that they
Right.
offended you.
Mhm.
And if God's telling them, then receive that. I remember after we'd been at the Bridge for a while, and Pastor Mike asked me to speak one Wednesday, and afterwards somebody was telling me I did a good job, and I was like, well, this and that, and he took me to the side and he said, just say thank you. And I'm like, yeah, but he said, no, Clark, say thank you. Receive that.
Yeah.
Because the way you said it, the way you gave it, that meant something to them.
Mhm.
So the part that I thought wasn't good, they may not even have heard, but there was a part in that spoke to them.
Mhm.
So receive that. In the same way, when somebody comes to you and apologizes, receive it.
Mhm.
Take that, because, you may have thick skin, or you may have a bad memory. You may not even remember that it was said.
Both things.
So, or both, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, what
I'll
was
own
my
it.
point? No. But receive that and give them the ability to also move on. And it's how many times did if you have a brother or sister, did they bother you?
Mm.
And yet you still love them. You still show up at Christmas and birthdays and call them or text them.
Yeah.
So you have to do the same with your brothers and sisters in Christ.
Right.
More so.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that's difficult for humans,
Mm-hmm.
is giving yourself the same grace that you give other people.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so, I mean, a lot of times, most of the time, if there's
Mhm.
ever something and then you're like, oh gosh, I don't think I should have, whatever, fill in the blank. And just allowing yourself a screw up every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
And then I think in those relationships that you build in your body of Christ, you're going to come across somebody who's going to call you on it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like, well,
Mhm.
that was just another time that I messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you have a friend, a family member, a child
Yeah.
to say, this has come up before. And,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
even a
Yeah.
pastor to call you on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if we go through all this and then it doesn't get fixed, what's our response then? Because it's like because for me, I thought that I had forgiven people, because we ended up in another church and things just went south, just really bad. And so as that pastor left and, we left and the church is not a church anymore. They've changed names, changed ministries, and everything's changed. But it didn't get fixed. And so I thought, well, I'll forgive. And I thought that I'd forgiven. But the Lord revealed to me that you have not forgiven them yet. I'm like, yes, I have. And you're like, no, you haven't.
Yeah.
How do you pray for them? I'm like, well, I pray that you reveal to them. Like, see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wow. So I began to pray for them, like, Lord, bless them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Protect them.
Mm-hmm.
Bless their ministry. And at that moment, it's like forgiveness really happened. Because now when I think back, I can remember the good things.
Right.
I can still remember the negative and the
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
That's not where mine goes when I see them now. I see them on Facebook or whatever. And for us, it was that parting of ways. Haven't seen them or spoken to them. And if I would see them, I think I would go to them and give them a hug and say, I love you.
Yeah.
Because that's how I feel. How they feel, I don't know.
Right.
I can't speak for anybody else. But for me, I can say that the Lord took me through a time of forgiveness to where he showed me what forgiveness is. And instead of like, show them,
Yeah.
We can't pray these get them prayers, and think that we've forgiven people and just say it out loud. Saying it out loud doesn't mean you have.
Right.
You may be confessing it, but it doesn't mean that you've actually
Right.
done it. So for me, what if it's not repairable is to forgive and let go,
Yeah.
and don't hold a grudge, but it may be different for everybody, but I think, the not holding a grudge and forgiving is the same across the board.
Yeah.
But everybody's situation may be a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost is to realize that you were offended in the flesh. They use their flesh to offend you, right or wrong. I'm not passing judgment. If they stepped on your foot got hurt, but that was in the flesh. So don't hold it against God and don't hold it against another church. Don't be like, well, you know what? Oh, Brian, he offended me, so I'm not going back to church. Well, what did that prove?
Right.
And so just remember that you were offended by the flesh and you were offended in the flesh. So move on. And yeah, it may not be the right thing to do to leave a church. But if you do, don't leave the church. Stay with
Right.
God. Stay
Yeah.
with, because Jesus isn't going to turn your back or his back on you. And trust me,
Yeah.
we've all done things to offend God.
Yeah.
So just find that place to land after you've left.
But I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's a process. I mean, it's not this happens on Monday and then on Tuesday you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go to, there has to be, your spirit has to work through it. There's just, there's repair, there's growth, there's hurt, there's healing, and it's a process.
Right.
And in some terms it's years, but as long as there's intentional going forth, I'm working on this, I'm not leaving the church, I'm cultivating relationships, this is hard, I'm going to push through awkwardness. They're just as long as there is an intentional step closer to Jesus, you will flourish.
Right.
That trimming off the dead, man,
Yeah.
look what's happened now. Uprooting those weeds, man, look what's growing now.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
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 And I'm speaking as Pastor Clark, if you show up at the bridge and you come because you left another church, because you were hurt. I'm not saying you have to come and give me the details, but when you come in and you're visiting, let me know. Let me know you're looking for a church because you've left another church. And I can help you through the process of things we do and things we don't do. I heard this. I was at an FCA event one time, and this girl speaking, she was, her dad and her grandfather were both pastors. And anytime somebody would leave the church, they would track them down and do an exit interview. Why are you leaving? Was it us? What can we do to make it better? And the same thing. And when you come into to the bridge, if you come from a hurt place, like I said, you don't have to give me the details, but let me because here's what I'm getting at. I don't want our church to grow because another church is failing.
Right.
There's enough
Yes.
unchurched people out there that all the churches in our area could grow.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and we had this conversation. There's a person that's coming to the bridge, and I'm like, I'm kind of hurt that they're coming because the church they're leaving at one time was a great church, and they're going through a rough season right now, and I love this guy, and I'm glad he's I'm glad he's still in church and he's an asset. And it hurts me that church is losing people. And so, like I said, if we can help repair and you can go back to that church, I don't care. I will help send you wherever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know we kind of talked a lot about leaving a church and how you should and how you shouldn't. But I think number one is to forgive, to communicate. Number two, but then try to stay. If there's not a biblical reason, if there's good, I won't say good preaching, but if the word is sound, if the
Right.
doctrine is sound,
Yeah.
and there's not, and the Lord isn't in your leaving, you need to do everything you can to stay and support that ministry because it's your family. But we do know sometimes that you're called away, and sometimes it's because things happen.
Right.
And what we we were just trying to talk about today is what do we do when things happen? So, so I hope this podcast has been a help to you guys. Maybe if you know anybody that it's facing what we've been talking about, there's church hurt, or they because so many times, like you said, people they get hurt in church and they don't go back to the church.
Yeah.
Right.
And
the church didn't hurt you.
right, it's people, a person
Right.
did. So if we're going to go by that standard, then we have to say we can't go around anybody because
Yep.
that's the person that's in that location that hurt you. So don't go to the store, don't go to work, don't go to the gas station, don't go anywhere because there's people everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
And so don't use that as an excuse to not go to church. So our number one thing here is to forgive and to try to stay put. Try to stay where you are. Work through things. If you're struggling at your church and you're like, the leadership is this or whatever, go talk to them. Communicate. And number one is pray.
Right.
Because you want to go where the Lord is telling you to go and where He's leading you to go. And sometimes the enemy will fight you with that because the enemy doesn't want you where the Lord wants you to be.
Right.
Right.
So if you're facing some things, sometimes it's not the leadership, sometimes it's not your flesh, sometimes it's spiritual. Sometimes the enemy is just trying to get in your way.
And it just came to mind the spirit of religion. Oh, we've never done things like that before. I can't
Right.
be in a church that does things different every,
Yep.
be mightily aware of
Yeah.
that spirit of religion because that it just can pop up and you're thinking, oh no, this is righteous anger. I should fight for, our parking spaces have always been perpendicular. Why are they at an angle?
Yeah.
Yep.
or whatever silliness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's crazy. I vote we move to parallel parking.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most cars now, you hit a button,
Yeah.
does it for you.
I think we'd probably lose 75% of the congregation if we said you got to parallel park when you
Yeah. 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 The old people haven't done it in a long time, and the young people have only done it once to pass their test.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Could be a problem.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for joining us today on the podcast, and guys,
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's been fun.
So hopefully we've been a blessing to you guys who are watching, and if you're in the area, if you're here in West Virginia, we'd love for you guys to come visit us sometime at the bridge, and we're all there.
Yes.
We've referred to the bridge quite a bit today. So if you're in West Virginia and you have a home church, don't leave it, but come visit us there,
Yeah.
sometime and say hey, and then go back home to your church and support them.
Yes.
Support your
Yeah.
local ministry, support your pastor, support your leadership, communicate with each other, and just be a family. Be a family of
Yes.
God
Yes.
in the church.
Yeah.
So, guys, I think that's it.
I
So,
like
All
it.
right.
all right, guys, we'll see you all next time on Church Talk. Thanks for watching.
She's like the big ornery sister.
And she said last night, after you said the Southern Gospel thing, she said, "Hey, my head in a wood chipper." I was like, oh, that is.
Yes.
Try to do this without laughing.
Okay.
You can leave all the laughter in here.
Okay then.
It's going to be a 6-hour podcast.
I have some.
Thank you.